Too often, people seek training after they've encountered a violent situation. Criminals look to exploit us through one thing that we all possess. Listen on to find out what that is. Tim is the founder and creator of Target Focused Training and is well known for self-defense and close combat training. During the last 20 years, he's trained not only law enforcement, the U.S. Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, and the U.S. Border Patrol, but also corporate clientele from around the world. He is an author and a public speaker in over 40 countries. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Prey Podcast. Tim, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey Podcast today.
Hey, Chris, I really appreciate a chance to speak with the audience.
Awesome. Can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are, what you do, and how you started doing it?
Yeah, I'm a military kid. I grew up on a military bases. My father was an officer in the Navy, lived all around the world, basically was taught early on a lot of martial arts and combat sports by the Marines. The Marines basically were our circuit dads at each one of these bases, the ones that weren't deployed. And so I was immersed in combat sports early in my life. Got introduced. My dad's last deployment was last assignment was he had a ship. He was CO of a ship over in San Diego. We lived on Coronado Island, and we lived in Navy housing, officer housing, which literally my back fence backed up to the Silver Strand Highway. Across there was this huge compound with a big fence and had an obstacle course and had all these crazy things. And we quickly found out one night on Sunday night, my dad was gone. He was deployed. He was gone. My mom was just kicking back. She just put us all to bed. And I was probably 12 years old. And all of a sudden across the street, it sounded like World War III went off. There was automatic gunfire, explosions, everything. And my mom had no idea what was going on. And we could see it because it literally was our backyard. And, we all got up and we're in our pajamas and everything. A lady next door, who ended up being one of my mom's really great friends, Sam Christensen, she ran over with two glasses and a bottle of wine. And she's going, Carol, don't worry. It's just the SEALs, And then she explained what Hell Week was. And that was the beginning of Hell Week. And I said, my brother and I were just like, oh, what is this? And so my goal was always to be a SEAL. And I did that. I got selected. I went to officer, through officer school. I was a ROTC guy at USC. That was the only deal I had to make with my dad. I'm just giving you the Reader's Digest. But I went through. I was up against 2,500 guys to get 2 slots to that. I did it. I flew to DC. I talked to the detailer. I told him, I'll never quit. And that was true. I flew through training. I knew everything about training. I'd made friends with the SEALs when I was a young kid. I understood training inside and out. I had a really unfair advantage. My group won Hell Week. I flew through every evolution. I had 2 weeks left. I had already been selected back then. The hot team to go to was SEAL Team 4. They were working counter narcotics. If anybody who has watched the show Narcos, that's what was going on during that time. And that was all the action. I got that slot. So I was very excited about going to that. I had a couple of dives left before we graduated and went to airborne school. And in one of those dives, I was a knucklehead. I was congested. I went down. It was a very easy dive. We were doing a traditional frogman thing where we were tying explosives to concrete obstacles. No big deal.
Everybody does that.
Yeah, I know. Underwater wave comes, hits me in the ear where I was congested. Bursts my eardrum, goes up into the inner ear, empties out my semicircular canal fluids. And I went, cold spike goes up, warm fluid goes out, and I lost all sense of balance. Oh. And this is something where I had been, I had been through training. I had had my butt kicked. I had been hurt. I had been put down. I always overcame everything, This was something that was true injury to the human body. I lost control of my body. I lost control of my balance. The only way I got up was by pulling on the rope to the inflatable boat that was above. And I knew I was pulling myself up, but I felt like I was pulling at 45 degrees. Oh. Now, the reason I'm giving you this detail is when I got up to the top, my head was flopping, bleeding, everything. I knew as soon as they pulled me on board and the corpsman who was there, great guy, gets out his equipment, looks in my ear right away. I could tell just by his response that I was done, that I had injured myself so bad that there was no way I was going to be able to do pressurized diving. So here I am 2 weeks before I'm going to my dream job and getting in there, and my whole world gets turned upside down by injury to the human body. Now, what's interesting is I end up going on a very different career. I'm in the intelligence community, in special warfare. I get involved in all this stuff that leads to what I'm doing today. They were changing at the same time. The world changed. The Berlin Wall had just come down, and the Soviet Union was no longer the big threat anymore. And we had to change our tactics, especially in the special operations community. And we had to start putting hands on people again. And we really hadn't done hand-to-hand combat training really since Vietnam at that point. And that's when they invited me. I was on the admiral staff as an intel kid, and no business being there, but they liked me, and they kept me, and they knew I did very well in training. But they started looking at hand-to-hand combat, and that's when we started bringing in people from all over. The reason they had me was I had a from all my training over the years with the Marines, I had black belts in judo, taekwondo, tang soo do. I had done a lot of boxing. I was very, very comfortable in that arena, and it always fascinated me. So that was it. That was me. And they said, hey, why don't you come on this pilot program that we're doing? We're trying to find a new system to train in hand-to-hand. Turns out I get a call from a DEA buddy. He tells me about this crazy guy that literally lives 2 blocks from my apartment in San Diego in Pacific Beach. I'm like, what are you talking about? We're bringing in experts from all over the world. You guys are telling me. My DA buddy was just pretty funny. He goes, hey, listen, he goes, he used a much choicer word, but he said, this guy's a real jerk. He goes, but you get along well with jerks. And I understood what he said, meaning I have an ability to talk to alpha predators and get good information out of them. They trust me. It's if I have a superpower, that's it. I'm fascinated by people like that. I know how to approach them, and I get really good information. And so he was my first real chore that way. He came in. Long story short, I introduced him to the team guys that I was working with, all senior guys. This guy understood it right away. He had everything the other groups didn't have. He was able to integrate not only the brain and body, but also the kit and everything that you could wear. So it was very universal. So that's how I started to get into it. I became an instructor. Then I started doing contract work after I got out of the military. I got out of the military right after Panama. And we did kind of pre-Blackwater stuff before there was a Blackwater. We were doing a lot of work in South America. I did a lot of work in Caracas, Venezuela. Trained a ton of people in the system that we're talking about. And then after 9/11, I broke off from my partner at that time, the guy that was there. He wanted to go in a different direction. And 9/11 was where I started working with civilians a lot. I was invited by a lot of corporations to train originally their security teams for like overseas negotiations. And a lot of them were oil companies that go into really dangerous parts of the world, and their kidnapping was a real situation. So we did that. We would train the security teams, but then we'd also train the principals. And then once I trained the principals, I remember training the CEO for Mobile. Lou Noto was the guy at the time. And he said, you have to train my family. And so we started doing that. And we weren't sure because what we trained, is basically injury to the human body. And it's a very specific skill set that you want if your life, if you're facing imminent grievous bodily harm. So that's how we became. And I evolved in the last 30 years. We've trained in over 52 countries. I have 52 instructors that we've created. We've trained hundreds of instructors in the special operations community. It's been a stellar career. But my favorite thing to do is what you and I are doing right now, is talking to an audience that probably didn't seek me out. And the reason I like that is because the majority, if the people watching don't know who I am, that's a good thing, because usually people come to me after the fact. They find out about me after the fact. 70% of the people that come to me are people that have had experience with violence, unfortunately, in some way, shape, or form. Only 30% are proactive. So I'm hoping the majority of your audience is in that 30% category, because it's great to get this information before you need it.
Yep, that's the goal, is to be proactive here and get a little bit of baseline background and knowledge going to point people in the right direction. So I love that your desire is to be proactive with people as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did have a couple of questions, and it's a little down the rabbit hole. But this is just me personally asking. Was it a pretty big challenge going from, I know what I'm going to do, I'm going to be a SEAL, to having this ear canal injury and it just ending overnight?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of your folks have listened to, in the past 3 years. I think every Spec Ops guy has a podcast,
Yep.
and so you probably heard some of these guys. You hear how they are. If you listen to Jocko or anybody, you hear how hardcore that whole group is. Well, I was, I was the golden boy in my class. I was arrogant. I was unstoppable. I didn't really rub it in everybody's faces, but I was going to be the anchor man, which is the honor candidate for my class in Buds. I was that guy. And then I have this fall from grace. And you go from being like the alpha that everybody's following and maybe not liking, but going into, oh, you are a leper. And nobody wants to get near you because they're afraid the injury might rub off on you. And so it shows in their world that was a weakness, and it wasn't theirs. It's a fear-based thing. You're going through training. You know how vulnerable your body is to injury, and then you see somebody like me fall from that, and they're like, oh, there must be something wrong with them. For me, mentally and from a challenge standpoint, it was devastating. I really thought my career is the only thing I did, and which was absolutely ridiculous because the Navy, the attrition rate back then was 75%. People that came in, that's after they've been vetted and everything, 75%. So you had, if you were lucky, a 25% graduation rate. There's no other special operations job in the Navy, meaning I was stuck. Back then, you can do the lateral transfers that you can do now. But back then I had no other. So if I didn't make it, I was going to be stuck on a ship. And it just happened that they said, listen, this kid's been trained in the basics. He understands that we are expanding our command. We need a new intelligence group, but we need people that understand what we do. That was the only thing that saved me. The admiral pulled me out, got me trained up in intel back east. I came back and I had a position that was ridiculous. So what's amazing is my career path ended up that injury defined me.
Yeah.
It ended up being, and in fact, I'm so empathetic to people because I understand I was bigger, faster, stronger. I mean, I'm still, I still have the presence, I'm not the 27-year-old, Uber wonder that I used to be, but I get that. But what's so interesting is I truly understand what it's like to be bigger, faster, stronger, and then get injured and you have no control over your body. And to be able to share that with the people, to sit there and say, hey, listen, as amazing as the world we live in with the technology and all the advances that we have, information at our fingertips, all of this, it's my job to remind everybody that, hey, listen, we still do live in this physical world, and there are some things that you have to be aware of. And to me, the injury represents kind of the change in my story to where this is what I was, I never would have met the instructor. I never would have. I mean, there's so many things that wouldn't have happened if I didn't have that injury. I wouldn't, and not only meeting the instructor, but meeting the instructor who get the first truly credentialed special operations, 2 separate hand-to-hand courses put into the system, the official system. The SEALs train with a lot of different people, but very few people have coursework actually, designed and put into the curriculum. So it was an amazing thing for a young officer to go through. And then my career that I went, I told you I had a CEO of Mobile. I've met celebrities. I've met people at a level that I never would have been introduced. One of my longtime clients, great friend, and he puts me in some of the most interesting situations in the world is Tony Robbins. And he met me through, just a random thing. And all of that wouldn't happen if I went in and had my traditional SEAL career, so I tell people all the time, my younger son recently had a situation. He was recruited by the Yankees. He was going into two all-league athlete at his college at Chapman. He was going into AAA with the Yankees, got rear-ended. His back got screwed up. He just couldn't produce the torque that he did on his hitting all the time. And it was interesting. We had this conversation. I said, I hate to see this happen to you. I said, but it's going to be interesting to see what you do with this.
Yeah.
And he knew exactly what I was talking about because we were similar ages when this happened. And he had a very different, situation. And, I think I easily could have gone down another road if I went into the self-pity and all of that. And it was tough. And I did have that time frame. I mean, I did mourn the loss of that kid, that was the superstar. And, but I tell people all the time, not to be airy-fairy about it or anything like that, but challenges like that always bring in opportunities.
Yeah.
You may not see them right away. Like I could never imagine the career that I don't feel I've worked a day since I left the military because I love what I do. And I've been very fortunate, in how I've done it, but it was not planned out. It was truly just an interest I had in helping. I really, like what we're doing right now, I have a real interest in making sure there's something in this interview that somebody hears. I don't know who it is. I know somebody in the audience is going to hear something that's going to make a difference in their life. They're going to do something differently than they normally would have done because they heard some information here, and it's going to minimize the chance of violence coming in their life. To me, that's the ultimate goal with all of my clients. Mm-hmm. I don't want to turn them into super ninjas. People like me that actually take it to the levels that I take it, and my instructors, we're those mutants that are just, we're a little bit off in this stuff because we take it to insane levels.
But I can imagine.
Oh yeah, but what's great is you don't have to. The real message for everybody is, that's not the goal. You really don't have to have years and years and years of training to create a situation where you minimize the chance of violence coming in your life. The physical training that I do when I show you, where to go in the human body, it is the best way to get you in the correct mindset because, we just did a seminar last weekend. And what people always talk about is, wow, the fact that you made me go through the human body and learn how to break things so they no longer work, either structure or sensory system of the human body. And we're very explicit about that and very straightforward because you need good information if your life's on the line.
Yep.
What's interesting is once they've experienced that, they then are far more open and far more proactive about changing any unnecessary risks they've been taking in their life. And it just seems to have that physical experience of you actually having to go through and say, hey, if I ignore all the things that I could do to minimize stuff coming in my life, and I have to, I'm facing imminent grievous bodily harm, and now it's just my brain, my body, and whatever tool I can grab, and what I have to do to another human being to be able to survive, this, man, unless I have no choice, I really want to make sure I minimize the chance of that ever happening to me. So behavioral change is my huge goal with everybody, and it's not hard to do.
So let's talk about it. So what are some of the kind of from your experience and what you've trained people on, where are the situations where people don't realize that they're putting themselves in danger?
Number one threat to everybody is this thing. And I don't say that lightly. And
for those that are listening, what is in your hand?
Oh, I'm sorry. I have my smartphone in my hand, and I have I have an iPhone in there. And the reason I say that to everybody, the reason I'm talking about that being challenges, it's amazing. What I can get done on my smartphone 10 years ago would have required me having my big desktop and everything. I mean, I can do things instantaneously on my smartphone. It gives me mobility. It gives me unbelievable access to things that I never could have before. I do marvel every day about I'm able to do international transfers. I'm able to do all sorts of. I have clients from all over the world. I can talk to anybody all over the world just off of this device. But here's the problem. I also willingly use it in public at times, and oftentimes I will take not just the one sensory system of my eyes, but I also have in headphones. So I've given up two primary sensory systems of the human body, and it's the number one thing that predators look for men and women, especially in urban environments. Mm-hmm. They look for you to do that. And what's interesting is I remember years ago in New York taking the subway. There'd be some interaction in the old days, so most people would have maybe a paper up or they'd be reading something, but they still had their sensory systems available to them. Yeah. You go on public transportation now in any major urban city right now, everybody's focused. One of the videos that I show is a video of a Seattle bus robbery. And there is a guy walking down the aisle of the bus. And you can tell it's all tech workers, all, very well-to-do people. And he's holding a gun and he's literally just robbing people. He's just taking things left and right. Nobody is talking to anybody. The guy that he finally gets to, that you see the gun come in front of him. This guy looks up from his phone. He recognizes what's going on. And in this hand is his phone. In this hand, he redirects the gun. And he goes forward. So it's actually a very good move. He doesn't know he's probably doing it, but he redirected the vector so the gun no longer intersects him. And then he's right in front of the guy. Oh. And then I think, great. You look at the video, great. He's got his phone. He can use it as an impact device on the guy. We're going to see this, right? What do you think he does with his phone?
He drops it. He makes a phone call.
Nope.
Starts the video.
He has a long coat on. It's a winter coat that he has on. He is taking the phone and stuffing it in his pocket. I could not, I'm telling you guys this, and you're probably saying, no way, Tim. Yes. I have it on my YouTube channel. You'll have the contact information on it. You can see it for yourself, because it's the same thing. The first time I saw it, I was dumbfounded. And what's really interesting, when I did this talk at Google, I opened up with that. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting is everybody in the Google audience, and I do this deliberately to people, I show it first and I don't say anything. And nobody notices that he does that. In fact, in their brain, they're going, oh yeah, I don't want to crack my screen. Boom. I mean, to them, it was all that. It wasn't until I pointed it out that everybody was shocked. So think about this. You have a gun pointed at you. Okay. You redirect the gun. You're coming in. And your life is on the line at this point. And this smartphone is so powerful, so embedded in you, that you're going to protect the phone before you protect yourself. That's how much these things own our brains. Listen, I'm not a Luddite. These are going nowhere. These technology devices are there. We just have to be aware of them and how powerful they are.
Do you think that part of that is because there's this kind of embedded muscle memory we're so used to in our everyday lives, when something happens, we just put our phone in our pocket, that we put it away because we don't want to break it, that just becomes that behavior is the second nature. It's not so much that he thought, oh gosh, the guy's going to break my phone, I better put it in my pocket. But it was, well, I've got this phone, I need to put it away.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It was something he does it time and time again. And, people always say, well, I'm going to rise to the level of the event. No, you're going to descend to your level of training. You will drop to the minimum. And what was his training? His training was, I always put my phone away. I do this. And his brain said, oh, hey, take care of the phone first.
Yeah.
And it was a very logical thing for the brain, because if you tell the brain to do certain things, even subconscious, even kind of unconsciously, it will do that. And basically in his mind, this was so attached to him and so necessary to him that he protected it, rather than using it as an impact device to save his own life. And so that's probably my best example of the downside of technology, mm-hmm. and how addictive these things are. I look at my screen time sometimes, and I'm going, oh, damn, it's a lot. Well, what I do though is it's good and bad. I never need to have any downtime. Like waiting, I can listen to a podcast. I can read my Kindle. I have my Kindle app on there. I go through tons. So I've gone through unbelievable amounts of information on my normal downtime. If I'm shopping, if I'm doing things, I do weight vest walks, and it's great. I mean, I just learn. But for me, I always keep one ear free. Mm-hmm. I listen to it in mono, which is no big deal, especially for podcasts. And I make those things, and I force myself to scan and look, and I'm not looking at my screen while I'm doing that. What I catch myself doing is I make myself just be aware of, okay, I'm about to enter a public area, especially when I'm traveling. I travel a lot. If I'm traveling to a city where I really don't know what's going on, I'm probably going to risk a conversation with somebody who I really don't want to talk to, rather than, do the thing where I don't have to do it, just because that awareness. I try to educate myself on that. And it's tough. I make no bones about how tough these things are, but I know it's the thing everybody hears, don't run with your ear pods, your iPods on. Yeah. No, you got to make it really real for people. And I think I haven't found a video yet that doesn't grab people like that video grabs, because it's just so unbelievable when you see it, and yet makes so much sense. Awareness of it is the first step, mm-hmm. Just like in anything, we're unconscious how much we allow these things to, control us, basically. Now it's in a very positive way most of the time. But when it comes to your self-protection, it's absolutely used against you each and every time. And predators absolutely look for it because, you're disengaged. You're complete. And these sensory systems that you're giving up are really big time. Giving up your hearing and your sight.
Yeah.
Is really key. So I know probably people have heard this before. I get it. And you're like, yeah. No, that's why you need to see at least some video reinforcement of this. And then obviously this is where the physical training can really help, take care of that, because when you see examples and unfortunately fortunately for me, unfortunately for society, in the advent of the internet and video, we have closed circuit TV video of tons and tons of violent assaults. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting when you see how things are used. There was one recently in Seattle where the guy, the predator got him to redirect and look at his phone. He said something about his phone. When the guy wasn't looking, he grabbed him and dropped him on the ground and just stomped on him. Oh. And it was this guy's total focus in on the phone that he exploited to use, which is there. So, yeah, I mean, this is not to, I hope everybody understands. It's a reality. This is the world we live in, and there's tons of positive things about it. But I'm not even going to get into the idea of how much time we spend on the phones or anything like that. That's a whole separate conversation, and I am not an expert in that. What I am an expert in is telling you how it will be used against you when you're out in public. And if you are displaying this, if you're walking down the streets, if you're doing anything where you're totally immersed and there are those around you that you do not know, you are taking a tremendous risk.
Yeah. It's funny. And I'm going to tell an anecdote and it leads into a question. So in my neighborhood, some coyotes have moved into our neighborhood. People think, well, who cares about a wild coyote? Well, I've got a dog and I walk my dog, and these particular coyotes in the past have been aggressive. That, when someone's opened their front door and the little white fluffy dog runs out to pee on the grass, the coyotes have run up and grabbed the dog and taken them away. They've grabbed dogs on leashes and tugged at them. So when I'm out walking, I have this sense of, okay, I need to be looking for the predators. So I know to look for. I know what their ears look like in the grass when they're starting to poke up their heads. I know what their noses look like. So, I'm kind of scanning the bushes as I'm walking around the neighborhood, and I realize, I definitely don't. I think there's some extent in some neighborhoods I do that when I'm walking places. But what should we be looking for? How should we be kind of looking to identify potential predators when we're out and about?
That's the fascinating thing. So I'll give another answer though. I took my son to Clark County Detention Center. I do a lot of work with corrections. I study a lot of the prison gangs, and I've met a lot of the top predators in those gangs and interviewed them. And I do so because in that environment, in the environment of a federal penitentiary or a state penitentiary where people are there for life and they are interacting with each other, it's really this petri dish of what I call asocial violence. And asocial just means no communication. So I took my son there to the Clark County Detention Center. This is where they all get holed up until they go through the legal process, and then they get shipped off to wherever they're going. And the officer that was taking my son through, I'm trying to think, Connor he was probably 14 at the time. So my really good friend Jason, had him go, and we were about to go into this area where there were 75 prisoners and one guard. That was it. Wow. There's an open area. It was an eating area. These guys were seen as low threat, but they were real criminal. They were there. A lot of them were violent criminals. So my son kind of was a little bit hunched up. I could tell he's a little nervous. So he's hunched over. He put his hands in his pocket and everything like that. And Jason goes, "Hey, hands out of your pocket. Stand up straight. You're looking right in there." He goes, "When you walk in there, they're all going to look at you. The first thing they're going to say, is this somebody I need to kill? Or is this somebody I don't need to worry about? Or is this somebody that I need to fear?" He goes, "Those are the three things they're going to assess. You want to be the last one. You want to be the person that's alert and you're going in. When you go in, don't show anything." He goes, "Don't put your hands anywhere. They're going to want to see your hands to make sure you're not a threat when you go in." And it's jarred him. So he goes, so we go through the whole thing. Now we go through the whole thing and I tell him, at the end, we go out. This is in Las Vegas. Now, so Clark County Detention Center is literally right next to Fremont, the Fremont area, the Fremont Street. And when they let people out of the Clark County, when they process people out, they literally dump them right out. They literally walk right out and they blend in right away on Fremont.
Yikes.
And so my son, I asked my son, I go, hey, Connor, why do you think I took you there? What do you think the goal was? And he said, oh, I don't know, Dad, you wanted me to make sure that, what it's like to be in prison so that I never go to prison and don't do anything bad, or you wanted to do like the scared straight thing. And I go, no. I go, hey, listen, if you're dumb enough to do something criminal and get yourself in prison, that's on you. I said, you know how we raised you. I said, I'm not worried about that at all. No. I said, you saw the presentation, you saw everything, and I just showed you people coming out into the general population. They're walking down Fremont Street. He goes, yeah. I go, where are they? He goes, what do you mean? I go, where are they? Point them out to me. Well, Dad, I can't. I don't know. I go, exactly. I said, so the next time you and your buddies are out and you're out doing something, maybe you think you're going to make that cute comment or that smart ass remark, and he's not that kind of kid, but I was pointing out to him. I go, you never know who you're dealing with. I said, you don't know what their background is. You don't know anything. I said, outside of your own social circles where you know people, I said, you have no idea. And I said, I'm hoping that you're going to keep that in mind every time you interact with people. And so my goal in that is, the way I really answer what you're talking about is, since we can't pick out predators, and what's really interesting is the majority, the real nasty ones, that I've met, they're very physically unimpressive. They blend in. They're not there. I mean, some of the prison gangs have some unbelievable, just monsters that are there. And they're the physical monsters that you would imagine them to be. But a lot are just, average sized, and they're there, but they're very capable at what they do, and they will respond with violence when necessary. In the interaction, like perceived slights and stuff that you can't do, it's really important. So I conduct myself when I'm out. I conduct myself, and it may sound paranoid to people at first, but it's actually a great way to be. I conduct myself that everybody I interact with that I don't know is 6 seconds away from a shooting spree, and I don't want to be the person to trigger it. So how would I interact with that person? And I'm nice, I'm considerate, I am polite with people to the point to where I want people to relax, because I'm a good sized individual, and I can look. My wife tells me all the time, she goes, you don't realize how intimidating you are. And I laugh at it because I just don't see it that way. But when I get people and I have conversation with them, I want them to feel very comfortable around me. I want to goof. I want them to think I'm just this old meathead, kind of a goofy guy. And if they start treating me like that, and if they start joking with me or giving me a hard time, I know I have them at that point. Because now if I ever need my information, it'll be a complete surprise. I'm not coming off as just some hard ass or anything like that, because, if you go looking for it, you will find it. Yeah. So the best way to interact is not trying to figure out who's who. It's really trying to sit there and say, how do I interact with people I don't know? And, you want to be alert. Absolutely. That the situational awareness is very important and stuff. But you can inadvertently trigger somebody by being disrespectful in a way that you don't necessarily, it's a way that we get away with a lot of, we as society, I'm talking about society, we can be really rude to each other and polite. We can say things. I tell, especially I work with a lot of very successful entrepreneurs and founders of companies. And these guys and women, they're drivers, they go through, and they're very direct and blunt in their conversations a lot of times. And what gets them in trouble is when they take that outside of their business world and they interact with other people who are not in that world. Yeah. And they can run into that one person who's like, what? And it goes like that. And they've never seen it happen. It's because they just don't understand human nature. Excuse me.
And I've also run across kind of I always wonder if, when there's a homeless person on the side of the street and I'm walking by, do I make because I've had this go both ways. If I make eye contact, it's, why are you making eye contact with me? And it's confrontational. If I don't make eye contact, it's, why are you ignoring me and pretending I don't exist and causing a confrontation? I'm like, so Sometimes it seems like no matter what you choose to do, you're almost
Yeah, well, you're dealing with mental
Yeah.
illness on a lot of that. A lot of that's mental, so you just have to be smart about it. I generally don't make eye contact unnecessarily, only because, in the prison. It's really interesting. A good friend of mine, unfortunately, passed away a couple of years ago. He's a big fitness trainer, Charles Poliquin, and he was kind of like me. We traveled all over the world and doing different things, and we'd connect, time and time again. But he shared a story with me that I shared in my book, When Violence is the Answer. And it's really interesting. Kind of will give you insight into this community. Charles, if he'd go to a new city, he usually had one or two police officers that would attend his training, SWAT guys or something. And he would always ask them, he'd say, hey, what gym in town do all of the ex-felons work out at? And whatever gym it was, that's where he went to work out. And the reason he went to work out there was he said, hey, generally, I know the rules. Everybody's polite. Nobody's stepping in front of you, grabbing weights, taking your rack. Everybody's there because there's that underlying thing. If you understand the predator world, especially from a prison standpoint, everything is backed up by the credible threat of violence. Mm-hmm. And what's amazing is how polite that makes you, and actually really polite, not because you're fearful, mm-hmm. but I've had some amazing talk. Most recently, I'm in the gym, a really nice gym here in Vegas, and I saw a guy, and he had all the Russian tattoo. His stars on his 8-point stars on his knees, 8-point stars on his shoulders. He had all the appropriate tattoos. He was up there. He was up there in the Russian mob, and 3 different times we saw each other in the sauna, along with a bunch of other people. And he engaged me after 3 times. He started talking to me. What was interesting was everybody else in there. Now, they weren't doing anything bad, but there were some younger guys in there. And when I say younger, like anywhere from like late 20s to, late 30s, mm-hmm. Very kind of full of themselves and stuff like that. And they were making banter and stuff. And they had no idea you got this white shark just circling around. That's in there. And he's not intimidating. He made he was just very calm, very, and he was powerfully built, but he was older. Like he had one of those, he had a belly, but it was a very hard belly. You could tell this guy's done a lot of, work, and the way he carried himself. But what was interesting was it's just like, I knew just from my years, I go, okay, I know what I'm dealing with here. And I did the interaction where I didn't make eye contact with him the whole time. I was respectful when I went by, but I wasn't weak. I wasn't anything like that. And then he made a comment about my tattoos, mm-hmm. and because I have some tattoos, and he said, "Oh, those are very nice tattoos." He goes, "Do they mean anything?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I got a couple of things. These represent my kids, and stuff like that." And he goes, "Oh, yeah." He goes, like it. He goes, "So your tattoos have some meaning?" I go, "Yes, but they don't have the meaning that your tattoos have." And he smiled and he looked at me. And he goes, I thought you knew something." And I said, "I'm very aware." And I said, "It's nice to see you relaxing." And, we just had that interaction. But the reason I share that story is because I was lucky enough to where, this is my world. And so I can pick up signs that other people can't. Those people in there had no idea. Had they made a flip comment to this guy or done anything like that he necessarily would have acted on it, but they had no idea what he was, mm-hmm. And that's kind of my key with people. I think probably if you want the greatest recommendation on what to study for your overall self-protection, everything, I would immediately go out and get Robert Greene's Law of Human Nature and get the audiobook and the book on it. And that is your Rosetta Stone to understanding interactions with humans. And he really does a good job. People really understand Robert Greene. I'm interviewing him the end of this month, and I'm really excited about it. He wrote 48 Laws of Power. He wrote Art of Seduction. He wrote Mastery, 50th Law with 50 Cent. A lot of great books. The Art of War. The 37 Strategies of War that he put on. And people get very upset when they read. They go, "Oh, this is very, very disturbing." That you talk about this. I mean, people thought that he was glorifying this behavior. Mm. What he was doing was no. He goes, the reason I wrote 48 Laws of Power was because I was in Hollywood and these tactics were being used against me and I didn't recognize them. And he goes, what I want to do is I want to show this to everybody so you recognize them. I think his masterpiece is this law of human nature, because he takes everything from the previous books and he puts it in a very enjoyable, story-driven learning thing that will absolutely change the way you interact with people. And that's probably your greatest protection. The physical, training, what I have, it's kind of the break in case of, war type thing. Last resort. It's basically your personal nuclear weapon that when would you ever deploy it? It has to be a really rare time. And the way you minimize the chance of ever getting there is understanding us. We don't study us enough, and how we think and how we react. And you'll notice things about yourself when you study. You go, oh, yeah, I do that. I didn't realize that. And you'll change some things. But you'll also recognize when some of these manipulations have been used on you. And these predators are amazing at it. I interviewed a guy, Michael Thompson from the Aryan Brotherhood. He was a former leader of the Aryan Brotherhood. And it was a very fascinating interview that I did on my YouTube channel. And it was interesting. Michael said at one point, he said, we call it, when we try to make people comfortable, he goes, we call it warm smile, cold heart. And that's the idea. I mean, they will use your social against you. They'll make you feel really relaxed, and they're just about to pounce on you. They want to get close enough to you so that they can take action on you. And so the way you get used to that is, again, studying human nature is one thing. The way we train, the way I train my people, we train in an asocial environment, meaning there's no communication. That's the number one hallmark that I get from all of my clients that unfortunately had to use the information to save their life. They said, I recognized it went asocial. And what they mean by that was, oh, this is uncomfortable. My body, we have all these nonverbal ways of our body trying to warn us that we ignore. But he goes, I could feel every part of my body that something was wrong. And I recognized asocial. And then if you're in an asocial environment like that, that means you're facing imminent grievous bodily harm. The only thing that's going to get you out of this is using the tool of violence. And so when to use it. Everything that I teach people, I tell them the same thing. The only time it would ever be justified in using this is if you felt the threat was so credible that if you had access to a firearm, you would feel compelled to empty the magazine in that threat or threats. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't reach that threshold, it's not the time to use violence. Your ego getting, hurt because somebody called you a name or somebody did something like that. Anything that you have choice to disengage from, you disengage. The only time you use the tool of violence is when you're absolutely devoid of choice. And knowing how to define that, the antisocial aggression, which is all the things that we think we have to respond to, but are avoidable, meaning we can make decisions to get out of there, versus asocial violence, where the last thing you want to do is try to communicate with somebody when they're in an asocial mode. So that's probably the hallmark for really understanding how to interact and trust your body. Trust your body. Your body has so many unique nonverbal ways of communicating with you that if you're in tune to it, you're there. And sometimes that sounds like it's like a spiritual thing. It's not. It's a very evolutionary thing, that we have. And women are far more in tuned to their nonverbal than men are, in my experience, for the most part. So as men, we tend to ignore some of it until it's too late, mm-hmm. and then we find ourselves in these situations.
So it's what are some of the nonverbal cues? Is it kind of the
hair on the back of your
hair
head,
going up on the back of the
queasy
neck,
feeling in your stomach, that uncomfortable, like this guy's smiling at me, but I'm really feeling weird. And so I tell everybody, risk embarrassment. It doesn't matter. I tell women, unfamiliar guy gets in a elevator with you, get out. Just walk right out. Don't worry if you have to risk embarrassment. Better to do that, because when I hear from people, oftentimes the story it'll get to the conflict, but then I always have everybody tell me the whole story from, okay, what were you doing before? Did this. Well, there's usually 1 to 2 times where they knew something was up, but they ignored it because they didn't want to be socially awkward. They felt they were being maybe judgmental or something like that. And then it goes horribly wrong for them, and they have to deal with an act of violence. So, my whole thing is with people that if you're getting any of these cues from your body, there's something that's being picked up that your body's picking it up. It's just not communicating with you in the normal way. It's saying something's wrong here. Don't do this or don't go here. And that's something, the more you train in asocial, and the more more you read stuff like the laws of human nature and things like that, or my book, When Violence is the Answer, you have these tools that you can kind of reference and get used to. But it's not a hard thing to develop, and that's the interesting thing about violence too. Violence is actually the tool of violence. And I say violence, not fighting, not anything that's in there, because I want to be, when you say violence, people know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. But
to actually use violence, to train to deliberately injure somebody is a very easy skill set. It's not, what it takes is intent. And so what's interesting is I take this information that normally the best information is in the worst parts of society. But what I'm able to do is I'm able to pull out that really good information, give it to sane, socialized citizens, and then give them a reference point. This is the only time it would ever make sense.
Yeah.
And once people understand that, they go, great. And the way I do that is I'll do that analogy. Like, well, I know whenever I talk about gouging the eye, it's really like, something that really grabs people, because they understand you're irreparably damaging an eye, you're blinding a person. And so I'll give them the scenario and I'll say, hey, listen, you're at the Whole Foods parking lot, you're waiting for a guy to pull out. And as soon as this guy pulls out, a Tesla comes in and grabs your spot right away. And you've been waiting for 5 minutes, you're pissed. You get out of the car, the guy gets out of his Tesla, kind of like, throws his finger at you, hey man, whatever. You immediately knock him onto his car, you comb grab his hair, you pull him back, and then you gouge his eye out. And everybody's like, oh, or they laugh, or they that nervous laughter. So then I'll say, okay, I'll give you another scenario. You're at the bar, and a guy comes up to you, and you with a drink, he spills a drink on you, then looks at you and go, you're too fat to wear skinny jeans. That's it. You throw the drink in his face, you knock him down the ground, and then you just gouge his eye out. And again, everybody's like, oh my God, what are you talking about? And then I'll say, okay, you're at Sandy Hook dropping your kid off. You hear the shots go off. You see 2 kids drop. You see a teacher go down. You get your kid you knocked your kid to the ground, get your kid safe. You look over, you see the shooter, and he's dropping down to do a reload because he has a malfunction in his gun. You can cover the distance. You run as hard and as fast as you can. You jump on, you knock him to the ground. The first thing you see is his eye, and then you gouge his eye. You can take it. Interesting. On that third scenario, that's where everybody opens up and say, oh, okay, wait. How do you do that? What do you do? Because now they got the right context, because so much of good information, and it is good information, meaning if you ever need it, is shown in the worst context. It's shown in bar fights. It's shown in these ridiculous scenarios that these self-defense morons, show all this macho stuff that'll just fast track you into jail. But my job and the challenge that I like is being able to take this horrific information, that normally you just, repel from, and say, hey, wait a minute. No, there's something useful here. And let's learn the useful part of it, not the criminal part, And what's very cool about that is the tool of violence works for both parties. It doesn't care if you're the good guy or the bad guy. It's a very inert thing. Anybody can wield the tool. How the tool is used will determine whether or not it's justified. If it's justified, it'll be determined self-defense, and you're fine. If it is not justified, well, then you're going to be entering the legal system, and you're going to have to deal with that. And the legal system will sort you out. So it's very specific. So to me, that's what I love. I love sussing that out for people and getting them to think about stuff they would never in a million years, consider. But if their life's on the line, they absolutely need the information is absolutely, you can't put a value on it.
Yeah. It's that basic save your life type of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know we're running short on time here. Are there, you talked about gouging eyes out. Are there, not that I recommending people practice these things on your neighbors.
Right.
Are there other things of violence of last resort?
Yeah. There's what you really need to do is you need to understand the understanding of trauma to the human body. So there are areas of the human body that no matter how big, fast, and strong you are, you cannot protect. They're irreparable. And we know some of them, like we talked about the eye. There's obviously the throat. They talk about the groin all the time. Those are very, easy things for us to understand. But there's a whole bunch. There's approximately 71 areas of the human body that you can put a trauma into and get a big result. The result that you want is to be able to take the brain out of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we've all experienced that, if you touch a hot surface, your hand automatically comes off, and then you realize, oh shoot, I burnt myself.
Yeah.
Or if you step on a sharp object, your foot automatically comes up. That's called an autonomic reflex, a spinal reflex reaction. And what all that means is that the stimulus, the trauma was so great that instead of going the stimulus going all the way up to the brain and then the brain deciding what to do, it short circuits and it actually gets midway up the spine and then sends another immediate message back down to that area to say, move it, before the brain even knows what's going on. And so the reason those injuries are so valuable to us is because if I take the person's brain out of the equation, no matter how big, fast, and strong they are, no matter what they want to do, they have to autonomically respond to that trauma. And so that's really what we do, is we teach people where on the human body that is and how to do it, and to make sure that these aren't magical touch points. These are areas that you have to put work into. But like I have a 90-pound girl that was training with us last week. She was able to put her body weight into each thing. And who wants 90 pounds thrown into any of these vulnerable areas of the human body? And the other thing is too, I want everybody to understand, when I train people, I'm not training for combat sports. I'm not training them for a competition.
Yeah.
Those people are me. I'm here in Vegas. A lot of my friends are in the UFC. I love it. It's great. But they're a whole different class. And they also have, it's a gamification of violence. And the way you gamify violence is you take direct injury to the human body out of the equation. And that's what they do. Last time I looked at the rules at the UFC, there were 31 rules. 27 were prohibiting direct injury to the human body. And the reason being is there's no place. You're not trying to maim, cripple, and kill your opponent in a combat sport.
Yeah.
Whereas on the street, you absolutely want to do that. And the reason injury is such an important thing for people to learn is because it bypasses bigger, faster, stronger. And what's interesting, when going back to the prison situation, they all study anatomy at the highest levels. It's chilling when you think about it. They really understand anatomy. They know where to put the knives, the shanks, the tools. They know where to strike, where to go, because they can't afford to get it wrong. The reason I study these groups is not to glorify them. It's because for them, violence is their currency. And it allows them, the credible threat of violence or the actual use of violence effectively is what gives them the power to run the prison, to control the finances, to run the streets, to do all the things. And you're talking about groups like the Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Guerrilla Family, the Mexican Mafia, the Sureños. All of these groups are extremely powerful within the prison systems. The way they use violence is very sophisticated. And there's, like I said, that's where you get that good information from the worst parts of society. And it's interesting to look at groups that can't afford to get it wrong, because then opinion goes out the window. It's not like, I use martial arts X, or I do this, or I do. No, if it doesn't work, they don't use it. And it's a very utilitarian use of the tool. And what's interesting about that is they all look at things the same way. They will look at a 280-pound aggressive, shot caller for one of the prisons the same way they look at a 12-year-old girl, meaning they just see the similarities in a body, not the differences. And it's once I get my clients to have that mindset change where they no longer sit there and go, oh my God, this guy's so much bigger than me, so much stronger. But you sit there and go, oh, look, he has a throat like me. He has an eye like me. He has an ear like me. He has, the side of the neck just like me. He's got the knees, you start pointing out all the things that make him human. It's just an amazing switch in your mentality when you look at humans that way. It's very freeing in a lot of ways. And it gives your brain direction. That's the other thing, is oftentimes the reason we freeze is because our brain doesn't know what to do in this situation because we've never told it what to do.
Yeah.
And, understanding this information and studying it just a little bit makes a huge difference in how you look at subjects.
Is some of it that you're no longer looking at the threat aspects of the other person, but the vulnerability aspects of it?
I guess I trained a bunch of guys at the Mercantile Exchange in New York, a bunch of traders. And what was interesting was those guys got it right away. We call it cause state. You always want to be in cause state. The other guy's in effect state. Good friends of mine that from another training system called SIAC, my buddy Tom Kyer, I actually like his way of saying it better. He said, when it comes to violence, you're either a feeder or you're a receiver. And so that resonated with the traders. What was interesting was they understood that, well, we can think about a trade all day, but nothing happens till we actually execute and we see what goes on. And meaning you're not in control of the situation until you cause the effect. And that's what people get from this approach. It's like, I can't focus on what he can do to me. It could be overwhelming. What I can focus on is I can still think and move. He has not taken that away from me. Therefore, what's available to me? And you're outward focused on that. And it's a subtle switch, but it's completely life changing when you do it, because you no longer worry about what's been done today. If somebody grabs you, puts you up against the wall, you can't do anything about that. That already happened. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is when you do this training, boom, oh shit, I can still think and move. And I look at the other guy and I go, oh, what's available to me right now? He could have, you actually look at it as a gift. You look at grabs, you look at anything that doesn't take your brain out of the equation as a gift, because they go, wow, they could have done that. They could have injured me and I couldn't do anything. But now from this position, what can I do? And that's your starting point. Yeah. And so it's just I know some of it sounds like semantics, but it really isn't. It's very, your brain's really interesting. When you give your brain the permission to solve a problem, it goes out of its way to do it.
Yeah, our brains are really, really good at solving problems.
Yeah.
I joke about it with my wife that, you and I are very different. As I will have a programming issue, and my brain will solve that problem in the night while I'm asleep. My brain will solve that problem. I'll wake up and I go, there's the solution.
Yeah.
Our brains are just magical at finding ways to do things.
Yeah, and what's interesting is your brain actually enjoys the process. A lot of people talk to me all the time about, yes, the physical is really interesting, but the change in how I think and how my brain looks at opportunities. They find themselves, even standing in line, people will sit there and go, oh, I'll notice, oh, that's where his ankle is. That's where, just dead time that they normally had, in lines. And those things go, oh, in order for me to access that, I would have to be 2 steps closer. And so what's interesting, the brain obviously starts, look, now you don't tell people you're doing this, but what's interesting though, is your brain, will say, oh, hey, yeah, I'll start learning all this for you and just remind you once in a while. I laugh because a lot of my entrepreneur buddies say they say it's incredibly valuable during depositions, because they're looking at the attorney and they're going, oh yeah, Tim said 3 buttons down. That's where the solar plexus is and stuff. And it just, they use it for that type of, interaction. But it's interesting. I mean, your brain likes the challenge once you show it. And nothing's more fascinating than the human species.
Yeah.
To the brain. The brain really wants to figure that out. But what all this does, I just want to make sure, because as we're closing out, I want everybody to understand. Listen, I think the physical training is incredibly useful because it will force behavioral change. Mm-hmm. All right. But the goal is not to use the information. The goal is to sit there and go, okay, how can I now create a life that minimizes the chance of violence ever entering it? And that is the greatest self-protection tool you can ever have. And by going through a process like we've talked about, in this interview, you go a lot further along to that goal in a very short amount of time.
What is it? The best way to win a fight is to never be in a fight?
Absolutely.
I don't know if I got that saying right, but I know there's one similar to that.
Yeah.
So if people want to find you online, where can they find you on social media, YouTube, website?
Yeah, YouTube, it's Tim Larkin, Self-Protection Specialist. You'll find me. I got a couple hundred videos up there. If you like some of the subjects that we're talking about, I interview a lot of other subject matter experts, special operations community, prison people, martial artists that are there. So you can get a real wide variety of information that way. But the interesting part is if you're wanting to learn about trauma of the human body and stuff, I also have a lot of information there for that. If you want to jump right in and experience some training, some direct training, you can go to timlarkin.com. I have a free masterclass. Just give us your email and you get access right away. And it truly is a free masterclass that you put out. And if you enjoyed any of the subjects that we talked about today, that's a nice free way for you to get, all the information.
That's totally awesome. Super appreciate the free content and the pivots that you've made during COVID to embrace the remote. Yeah,
it's been interesting. I wasn't sure how people would respond, but it's been really fun. I've actually really enjoyed. I can go in depth on topics that I normally don't have time, and some of the other formats.
That's really cool. Tim, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey podcast today.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Pray podcast. If you found something in this episode helpful, please let us know by leaving a review at easypray.com/review. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Tim Larkin can be found at easypray.com/110.